The U.S.-China trade tensions are once again ratcheting up. U.S. President Biden has quadrupled tariffs on Chinese EVs and raised levies on other green tech, citing what he called China's unfair trade practices. And China has vowed to take all necessary measures in response, already hitting back with a tit-for-tat anti-dumping probe against EU, United States, just to name a few. Now, in today's JMS Focus, we closely examine the intensifying trade war between the world's two largest economies and, of course, its impact on South Korea. For this, we're now joined by our weekly commentator, Professor Jun-seok, on the line. Good morning, Professor Young.
Good morning.
All right, let's get started. Dare we call this Joe Biden's America First trade policies? U.S. President Biden has quadrupled tariffs on Chinese EVs and raised levies on other green tech, saying it is to safeguard domestic industries and address unfair trade practices brought forward by Beijing. Now, while some point out that he's even more aggressive than former President Trump in protecting American interests, what are your thoughts on this? Is this fair?
Well, we may be able to say that Biden is somewhat better than Trump in the sense that Trump sought to wall off America, while Biden is mostly trying to wall off China and limit barriers to selected products. So as a matter of degree, Biden seeks some cooperation from allies, while Trump, he's seeking almost complete isolationism and global policy that's unilaterally dictated by America. So let me compare these policies of these two people. Trump has said that if he's elected in the second term, he will increase tariffs on almost every country by putting in a 10% universal tariffs and then 60% tariffs on all Chinese products and 100% tariffs on all automobile imports, no matter which country they come from. While on the other hand, Biden has kept the Trump tariffs that he put on in his first term, and then increased tariffs on a limited number of products from China only. That's electric vehicles, electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, semiconductors, and some medical supplies that were extensively used during the pandemic, such as masks and surgical gloves. So in that sense, you can say that Biden has kept the range smaller, but effectively many of the policies of Biden and Trump, as well as some of the consequences, remain the same. Biden has still not removed most of the Trump tariffs that he put in his first term, not only those against China, but also those against allies. Steel and aluminum tariffs against the European Union are still in place, and in fact was renewed for another 2 years, renewed for 2 years. And then Inflation Reduction Act still maintains domestic content requirements for EVs and EV batteries, which may contradict Chorus FTA. The United States has kept steel export quotas against Korea. The CHIP Act still seeks to prohibit Korean firms which receive American subsidies from expanding production capacity in China. And perhaps most telling, WTO dispute settlement mechanism is still broken because the Biden administration refuses to allow assignment of officials for the appellant process, the appeals. And then one of the direct catalyst for raising tariffs on China just last week was the American so-called Article 301 report, where USTR accuses China of breaking international trade rules, such as illegal government subsidies. So while USTR is not wrong, it's interesting that on one hand, U.S. is relying on so-called international trading rules for justification of putting higher tariffs on China, but U.S. Biden administration is still not doing anything to revitalize the WTO after President Trump has sort of crippled that organization by not assigning officials for the dispute settlement process. So they seem to be working on both ends of the argument. And then the Biden administration's justification for trade barriers, like Trump's justification, is protecting American jobs. But careful studies show that for steel, aluminum, and solar panel industries, protection on those goods, jobs protected by trade barriers in the United States are far less than jobs destroyed because of higher costs for businesses, because they have to pay higher costs for solar panels and steel and aluminum. But this effect was sort of lost in the picture because overall, United States job market is so good. And then for other studies show that tariffs contributed to U.S. inflation, though very moderately. So the evidence from academic studies are there, but because the United States had such high inflation, not only because of the tariffs, but also because of the pandemic, the supply bottlenecks that we had from the pandemic, as well as increased demand due to COVID-era unemployment payments and increased government spending by both Trump and Biden administrations, that evidence just sort of got lost in the picture. And then when economists or businessmen present these arguments, well, back for the Trump administration, their strategy when they pointed out all these problems was just go, there wasn't. And then Biden administration used to criticize Trump administration for that, but now they seem to be using the same strategy. And because the effects, perhaps, of these trade barriers were relatively small, and because there's popular disapproval on China, the American public, at least for now, seems to be accepting these type of barriers on China. But if the barriers become more expensive and it starts contributing more to inflation, well, the American public may feel different if more problems emerge.
Of course, Beijing was quick to react, vowing to take all measures necessary to protect its national interests. Would China engage in a full-scale trade war with the U.S. this year, or are both sides extremely wary of each other if you look at the details? How would intensifying trade conflict between the world's two largest economies also, of course, impact the global economy?
Well, the problem is both sides are in conflict, but on the other hand, both sides still depend on each other.
Right.
On the U.S. side, U.S. is still plenty dependent on Chinese exports for everyday goods. United States does not have the manufacturing capacity to fully replace what China exports to the United States. So if U.S. completely cuts off Chinese imports, it would not only experience higher inflation, but probably shortages in some products. Consumer products. The problem is more serious for some crucial material like some rare earth and raw material in areas like medicine. Now, then taking the Chinese side, problem with the Chinese side is that Chinese side is undergoing domestic slowdown right now due to its debt and domestic housing construction problems. So any chance of China keeping a decent growth rate and maintaining employment depends on maintaining and even increasing its exports, and they cannot give up the American market. So they're going to try to keep as much of American market as possible. So it's in both sides' interest to perhaps not expand the trade war beyond where certain industries that both sides are competing in, like the electric vehicles and semiconductors. So now for Korea, Korea perhaps may gain a slight edge in U.S. markets because of these U.S. trade barriers against China. But the upside here is limited because, well, one of the reasons why trade barriers are in place in these industries is that U.S. wants its homegrown production. And right now, the factories are not in place. They're still building it. So until those factories come in line, it may Korea may experience some increases in exports, but once those factories do come online, they may prefer to supply themselves from the United States rather than use Korean exports. So I think the any upside that Korea can get from Chinese American trade barriers against China will be limited to maybe a few years, and Korean firms may face more intense competition in third markets. That's markets outside the United States, because China will be competing more fiercely there. They're going to try to sell off the goods that they cannot export to United States on other countries. So Korea may be facing more competition outside United States and other markets.
So as you've said, Korea may gain a slight edge in the American market, but what about long-term effects and outside of the United States, right? So Korean companies are, of course, watching very closely on related developments. Korean government, however, has said that local firms may benefit from the U.S.-China trade war. How do you analyze a possible impact on Korean firms and largely the economy?
Okay, well, I gave the big picture earlier, but let's look at the specifics. The goods that the U.S. put tariffs on are tariffs against China on electric vehicles, electric vehicle batteries, graphite, and some other critical minerals and permanent magnets. Then face masks, syringes and needles, medical gloves, and then solar panels and steel and aluminum. Korea is a major producer of most of these items. But again, these items were items where the Trump administration and Biden administration said that they're going to develop domestically. We all remember how Samsung and SK were led to build factories in the United States through massive subsidies. So they are starting to build those factories right now. Some of it are under current construction. Some of it is not. They haven't even started construction at all. But because these factories are not in place, the U.S. does not have the capacity to completely fill U.S. domestic demand. But U.S. is working toward higher domestic capacity, building it up for all these items. So until then, Korea may be able to increase their exports. But once those factories come online, exports from Korea may be even further reduced. And then on the third markets, like I said, outside the United States, we will probably be facing higher, stiffer competition almost immediately, since especially in areas of steel and aluminum, China will have to sell the steel and aluminum they make. They used to be able to use it within their own country because of the construction market there, but that construction market has died down. So the competition outside the United States and other countries is probably going to become much more fierce.
Now, amid a prolonged U.S.-China trade conflicts and, of course, global trade protectionism that's only spreading, what measures are then needed from the Korean government to mitigate fallout on Korean companies? So how do we protect our own?
Well, it really depends on who becomes president. If a Biden administration wins re-election, then Korea-U.S. Chorus FTA will offer some protection. But if Trump is re-elected, then the new Trump administration will probably completely ignore the Korea-U.S. FTA, if not eliminate it altogether. In fact, there's reports that says that Trump wanted to get rid of the Chorus FTA, but his advisors, especially the generals, stopped him from doing it in the first term, but obviously those generals are not going to be around in the second term. So the only way for Korean firms to survive the competition is to make Korean products more cost-effective, since it's unlikely that Korean products can win on the price front against Chinese goods. Korean firms will have to make sure that they can win on the quality and cost efficiency grounds, and that means keeping up the technological lead on Chinese products, widening it if it's possible. But Korea has been in some ways losing their technological edge against Chinese firms. while Korea used to export a range of intermediate products to China because China couldn't make them, that intermediate good exports has been shrinking for 5 to 10 years. Right now, China is replacing what they used to import from Korea with their own homegrown intermediate parts, and they've been actually exporting those intermediate parts to Korea. So if you look beyond semiconductors and some critical parts, we've seen that Korea-China trade balance has been changing to favor Chinese exports. And that's one of the reasons why we had a deficit with China in trade last year, at least for some months. So unless Korea improves its technological edge, unless it improves its efficiency, as Chinese technology catches up with Korean technology, there's going to be less and less room for Korean firms to compete with Chinese firms. So Korean firms need to up its technology game. They need to up their efficiency. And that also means that government policies has to reform to support these companies, like regulatory reform, but also technology policy, technology assistance, technology development, and make, say, investment easier for Korean companies and so on, so they can they can maintain the lead against Chinese firms.
But have we seen even small reforms in that regard in recent years?
Well, this current administration is trying to do a lot with regulatory reform.
Right.
But the problem is they're sticking to perhaps easier stuff. They're taking requests from individual companies. They're reviewing some of the most problematic regulations from their own ministries. But that maybe helps one or two firms at a time. But there's systematic reforms. They've not been able to do a lot of it, partially because of the domestic political conflict between the two political parties, but also because there's a lot of interest groups which keeps reforms from taking place. We see that in perhaps the current problems where SK Hynix has been trying to establish a factory in Yongin for the last 5 years. But it started out with environmental regulation problem, and then it led to a political problem dealing with cost of clean water that the factory needs. So after 5 years, the real construction hasn't even really started. Whereas right now it looks like the American semiconductor factories that we talked about, it's going to be up in about 2 to 3 years, maybe at most 5 years. So there's a real possibility that even though that factory in Yongin, they started to talk about it and they started to get the process rolling 5 years before the United States, in the end, U.S. factories may go up before the Korean factory.
It makes you think about our priorities, but there you have it. As Professor Yang has mentioned, many interests get in the way. Sometimes it's hyper-politicized as well, but we'll leave it there for now. How does Korea, meanwhile, keep a technological competitive edge, an efficient edge against growing Chinese firms? Thank you very much, Professor Yang. We appreciate your insights. We'll speak to you again next week.
Thank you.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.